They said the revolutionary troops were fearless. But inside the old stone walls of Fort Ashbury, fear was the one thing no man could escape. For decades, soldiers reported voices echoing through empty corridors, lanterns swinging on their own, and the sound of marching boots when no patrol was near. Then suddenly every report vanished, erased from the fort's official records as if those haunting nights never happened. But why? Who wanted the truth buried? And what did they fear would be uncovered tonight? We journey back to the late 18th century when musket fire lit the night, and the line between the living and the dead blurred. A forgotten chapter of America's war history lies hidden in those damp barracks. Soldiers claimed to see their fallen comrades walking again. Officers dismissed it as fatigue. Until one night, an entire watch vanished without a trace. What happened inside Fort Ashbury? And why did the Army destroy every trace of its haunted past? The truth was silenced once, but not tonight, because tonight, we open the records that were never meant to be read. The fort that history forgot. The fog rolled in from the marshes long before dawn, thick and heavy enough to swallow the world whole. By the time the first light touched the ramparts of Fort Ashbury, the sentries were already uneasy. The war had ended months ago, but peace had not followed. Not here. The soldiers left behind to guard this lonely outpost felt as though they had been forgotten by their commanders, by their country, and perhaps by the living themselves. Captain Elias Ward kept a journal. His entries, later recovered in fragments, spoke of strange nights. "The fort does not sleep," he wrote. "Even when every man is in bed, the corridors breathe." Ward had fought at Saratoga and seen men torn apart by cannon fire. Yet what unnerved him here was not the memory of battle, it was the silence between the wind. The way it seemed to listen back. The fort itself was old even then. Built on the ruins of an earlier French bastion, its foundations sank deep into earth that had seen centuries of blood. Beneath it, tunnels from the colonial days were said to run toward the river, though most were sealed after collapses. The locals, mostly fishermen and traders, called the area cursed. They claimed to see blue lights drifting near the marsh on moonless nights, and they warned the soldiers never to whistle after dark. The men laughed at first. Soldiers always do. But laughter fades when boots echo behind you in an empty hall. The first signs came quietly. A recruit named Latham reported seeing a lantern swinging down the main passage when no one was on duty there. The guardhouse door, heavy and bolted, would be found open by morning. Ward dismissed it as careless routine until it began happening nightly. Each time the same door. Each time the same faint smell of burning tallow. Though the lamps inside were unlit. By late autumn, the men refused to patrol alone. The fort, once alive with drills and shouted orders, now moved in whispers. Some claimed the walls themselves held a pulse. Others said they saw faces in the stone. Ward tried to keep discipline, but even he began to waver when Sergeant Caleb North fell ill. North was a hardened veteran, steady as iron, until one night he stumbled from the lower watchtower, pale as ash. He swore he had heard drums from beneath the floorboards, slow, rhythmic, echoing upward through the rock. A search turned up nothing. The tunnels were sealed. But North would not set foot near the tower again. A week later, he was gone, vanished during a night storm. His musket was found near the marsh wall, still loaded, his footprints leading out, and stopping in the mud. No body, no trace. Ward wrote that the ground swallowed him whole. After that, fear spread like fever. The men spoke of whispers near the well, of names being called softly by voices they recognized, voices belonging to the dead. In one letter, a soldier confessed he had seen Private Hensley, who had died months earlier of infection, standing by the gate at dawn. When he approached, the figure smiled, then dissolved into the mist. The fort's doctor, a weary man named Dr. Abram Kersey, began keeping notes too. He tried to explain it as exhaustion, malnutrition, or shared hallucination born from isolation. Yet even he could not deny what happened on November 12th. That night, as the garrison slept, the alarm bell sounded on its own. Men rushed to their stations, muskets ready. But there was no attack. Only the sound of boots, hundreds of them stomping beyond the western wall. Like an invisible army marching through the fog. The next morning, the soil outside the wall was trampled, though no prints were visible. And then came the orders. A courier arrived from the capital with sealed instructions. Ward was to continue regular duties and cease all references to unverified disturbances. Any mention in reports, letters, or journals would be considered insubordination. The soldiers felt it instantly. This was not denial. This was fear. Someone above wanted the story buried. Still, the fort held. Winter came hard, and the river froze, locking them in. Supplies dwindled. Ward's entries became shorter, his handwriting uneven. "The men hear things," he wrote. "They hear the war again." At night he claimed to smell gunpowder drifting through the barracks. When he looked out across the parade ground, he could see, just faintly, lines of soldiers standing in formation shadows against the snow, waiting for orders that would never come. Then, in December, came the event no one would ever explain. A snowstorm hit without warning, blinding and brutal. When it cleared by morning, the midnight watch was gone. Every man, 12 soldiers, their post empty, their muskets stacked neatly beside the wall. No sign of struggle. No footprints in the fresh snow. Ward sealed the fort's gates and sent a messenger to headquarters. Days passed. The messenger never returned. When finally a replacement unit arrived in spring, they found Fort Ashbury deserted. Fires still smoldered in the hearths. Food left half-eaten. Ward's journal lay open on his desk, ending mid-sentence. "They are not gone. The fort was shut down soon after." Official records claim it was decommissioned due to structural decay. But among the locals, the legend grew. They said the soldiers never left that on cold nights. Their lanterns still moved along the ramparts, searching for something lost. Years later, when the fort's logs were examined by historians, every report after October 1779 had been erased. Pages cut clean out. The missing records became a ghost story of their own, whispered by archivists who handled those fragile remnants. One of them claimed to find dried mud smudged between the pages, as if someone or something had turned them with a wet hand, but the most haunting discovery came much later. During a restoration project in the early 1900s, workers excavating near the old well struck a hollow space beneath the courtyard. Inside lay a sealed wooden chamber lined with musket racks, and beneath the dust, 12 sets of boots, perfectly arranged. As though waiting, the excavation stopped immediately. The site was resealed under government supervision, and every photograph taken that day vanished from the archives. Even now, the wind that passes through those ruins carries a faint metallic ring like a musket being loaded in the dark. The question remains, heavy as the fog that never leaves the valley, were those soldiers protecting something? Or trapped by it? And if the army erased their story to silence the past, what else lies beneath Fort Ashbury still waiting to be found? The next chapter begins with the first survivor's confession, the only man who ever escaped those walls. The survivor's confession: he came stumbling out of the tree line 3 weeks after the fort was abandoned, gaunt, frostbitten, and speaking to no one. Locals from the nearby village said they found him kneeling by the frozen river, muttering prayers under his breath, his hands blackened from cold. At first they thought he was mad, but when they saw the insignia burned into his coat, a faded revolutionary crest, they realized who he was. Private Jonathan Halle, the only man ever known to return from Fort Ashbury. The villagers carried him to the church infirmary, where he drifted between fever and silence for days. When he finally woke, his first words were, "Don't light the lanterns." No one understood what he meant. He asked for a priest, but when Father Merton arrived, Halle wouldn't confess his sins. Instead, he told a story that made the old priest's hands tremble. According to Halle, the night the watch disappeared, he had been stationed in the North Tower. The snow was falling sideways, blanketing the fort in silence. His partner, Corporal Dunn, had gone to check the gate and never returned. Then the bell rang, slow, deliberate, not the wild clamor of alarm, but the steady toll of a funeral knell. He looked down from the tower and saw movement in the courtyard. Men, or what looked like men. 12 figures, standing shoulder to shoulder, muskets at their sides. But none of them were wearing coats against the cold. And their faces. He said they glowed faintly as if lit from within by embers, Halle called out. No answer. He shouted again, and this time all 12 heads turned toward him at once. He dropped his musket and ran. Through the officers' quarters, down the lower hall, past doors that slammed shut on their own. The corridors were filled with whispers, not voices from outside, but from within the walls. Some called his name. Others repeated a single word over and over, return. He fled to the tunnels, though they were forbidden. The entrance had been sealed decades before, but the storm had loosened the stones. He pried his way through and crawled into the blackness. Behind him, he heard boots on the stairs, slow, measured, following. For 2 days, he wandered underground, guided only by the faint drip of water. The air was thick with the smell of iron. He found old torches, rotted crates, and at last a wooden door carved with a mark he didn't recognize. It wasn't English, he told the priest. It looked like the kind of writing they found on old headstones in Europe, letters that twist when you stare too long. He opened the door. Inside was a small chamber, dry and cold. In the center, a single table. Upon it, 12 brass nameplates arranged in a circle, each one bearing the name of a man from the missing watch. At first, he thought it was some memorial, maybe left by the French before the British took the fort. But then he noticed something else. His name was the 13th. He ran again. When he finally surfaced, it was daylight. The fort was empty. Fires still burned in the hearths, yet no one answered his calls. Every window was open, snow drifting in. The barracks looked as if the men had simply risen and walked away. Father Merton wrote that Halle wept as he told the story, his voice breaking. He begged to be allowed to leave the country, to go as far as the sea would take him. But that night, before the priest could arrange it, Halle vanished from his cot. The only thing left was his uniform and on the table beside it. The 13th brass plate. The official report said he fled during the night, likely driven to madness by his ordeal. The villagers didn't believe it. They said the church bell rang once, very softly, the hour he disappeared. After that, no one mentioned Fort Ashbury again. Decades passed. The war faded into history. The fort decayed into ruin, swallowed by moss and earth. But Hale's story lingered, passed from old soldiers to their sons. Some said he had discovered a secret burial ground beneath the fort. Others whispered that he had broken a covenant, a pact sealed during the war. There were rumors the Continental Army had used the fort not just for defense, but for experiments in communication, desperate to gain advantage. Strange devices brought from Europe. Radios before radios existed. Tools meant to hear what men could not. It wasn't until 1892 that the legend resurfaced. A historian named Margaret Winslow, researching early military outposts, came across Hale's partial confession in the church archives. She was fascinated and perhaps too brave. That winter, she traveled to the remains of Fort Ashbury to find proof. Locals tried to dissuade her. They said the ground still moved after dark, that no animal would go near the ruins. But she went anyway, accompanied by 2 assistants. For 3 nights, they camped within the old perimeter. She wrote in her journal that on the 2nd night they heard muffled drums far underground. On the 3rd, one of her assistants vanished. They searched until dawn and found his tracks circling the courtyard. Ending abruptly beside the collapsed well, Winslow returned alone, shaken and pale. Her final entry simply read, "They never left." Weeks later, she too disappeared while en route to Boston. Her luggage arrived without her. Inside was Hale's 13th nameplate. Today, that artifact sits locked in the State Museum vault, misfiled under unidentified relics. The engraving is faint, but under the right light, one can still make out the inscription, Jonathan Hale, Watchman. Eternal, some claim the brass glows faintly when held in darkness. Others say it hums like distant drums. None of the curators handle it anymore. And though no one admits it publicly, one archivist swears that the night it was catalogued, the security cameras in the vault flickered, and for 3 minutes, showed what looked like a row of soldiers standing silently behind the glass. What if Halle didn't escape the fort that night? What if he only carried it with him? The answer, it seems, lies in the tunnels that were never fully mapped. The same tunnels that, according to recently unearthed documents, were reopened during a classified operation decades later. The soldiers sent there reported nothing unusual. At first, until one man returned with frostbite in the middle of summer and a lantern that wouldn't go out. The lantern that wouldn't die the summer of 1957 should have been ordinary humid, restless, alive with the buzz of cicadas and the smell of pine. Yet inside the restricted zone that had once been Fort Ashbury, the air was wrong. Too still. Too cold. The government had reopened the site for what they called a geological survey, but those who worked the dig knew better. Rumors swirled about classified orders about a hidden vault beneath the fort, sealed since the Revolution. The team was led by Colonel Everett Lang, a stern man who didn't believe in ghosts or folklore. He was a soldier's soldier, practical, skeptical, certain that every mystery could be explained with enough reason and light. On the first day, he stood before the overgrown foundations and said, "Gentlemen, this is history, not superstition. Let's keep it that way." Among the men was a young private named Samuel Graves. He'd grown up hearing whispers about Fort Ashbury from his grandmother, who swore her great-uncle had vanished there. When he learned he'd been assigned to the operation, he tried to hide his dread. Soldiers don't talk about fear. But in his letters, home letters that would never be delivered, he admitted the nights there were like no other. The excavation began at dawn. Layers of earth peeled away to reveal stone corridors, old muskets fused with rust, and fragments of uniforms buried deep in the clay. Then came the discovery that changed everything. In a chamber beneath the courtyard, they found a single brass lantern, unbroken, its glass smudged with soot but intact. When they brought it above ground, it began to glow faintly, though no one had lit it. Lang ordered it secured, assuming it was some phosphorescent residue, perhaps from the metals within. But as darkness fell, the lantern's light grew stronger, steady, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. One of the engineers tried to dismantle it, yet every screw refused to turn as though welded by time itself. By midnight, several men swore they could hear faint footsteps around the excavation trench. Lang dismissed it as nerves. He doubled the watch and forbade any talk of paranormal nonsense. But discipline couldn't mask what everyone felt, that the air itself had changed. Even the insects had gone silent. 2 nights later, Graves was on duty by the tent where the lantern was kept. Around 2 in the morning, he heard metal scraping from inside. He thought it was the wind until the tent flap moved. Inside, the lantern was swinging slowly on its hook, as if pushed by an invisible hand. Then he saw something reflected in the glass, a line of figures, faint, distant, marching through the darkness behind him. When he turned, there was nothing. He reported it, and Lang reprimanded him for spreading fear. But that same night, the generator failed. Every lamp and floodlight died at once except the lantern. It shone brighter than ever, casting long shadows that looked like soldiers standing at attention. By morning, one of the men was missing. His bed untouched, boots still beside it. The guards found his footprints leading toward the dig site, then stopping abruptly beside the open pit. No sign of a fall, no blood. Just stopped, as if he'd stepped off the world itself. Lang sealed the site and called for reinforcements. But command sent no reply. Communications had gone dead. Their radios emitted only static, and beneath that static a rhythmic thump like distant drums. As hours turned to days, discipline broke down. Some men wanted to flee, others to destroy the lantern, but Graves couldn't stop staring at it. He said it reminded him of the stories his grandmother told about soldiers lost between worlds, carrying their light forever. He began to believe the lantern wasn't the cause of the hauntings, but a beacon. A warning. On the 4th night, Lang snapped. He ordered the lantern buried. "If it's the source," he said, "we end this now." They dug a shallow grave in the courtyard and lowered it in. But before they could cover it, the light went out on its own. Complete darkness swallowed the camp. Then came the sound boots on gravel, dozens of them, circling. Men shouted, fired rifles into the night, but their bullets hit nothing. When the flashes from their guns lit the field, they saw shapes moving between the trees' uniforms from another age, faces pale and blank. Graves dropped his weapon and shouted for them to stop. One of the figures turned toward him. Its eyes burned like coals. The reports end there. What little survived was pieced together from Lang's final log, found weeks later when another team arrived. His words were scrawled, uneven, almost desperate. "We thought it was light," he wrote. It was a door. When the Army sealed Fort Ashbury for the second and final time, they declared it unsafe due to ground instability. Every man who served on the 1957 operation was reassigned or discharged within the year. Colonel Lang was committed to a sanitarium where he spent the rest of his life muttering, "They followed the light." As for Private Graves, he was never found. But 5 months later, hikers discovered an oil lantern washed up along the riverbank, still burning beneath the water. No one could explain it. Scientists tested the fuel, the glass, the metal. Everything ordinary. Everything wrong. The lantern now rests in a locked government facility, labeled as Artifact 13. Researchers avoid handling it for long. They say the glass feels warm to the touch, as if held by unseen hands. Some nights, when the room is dark, the light flickers steady, rhythmic, like footsteps fading down a corridor. And yet, there are those who whisper that the lantern isn't waiting to be found. It's guiding something, calling it back. Because recently, more than 2 centuries after the first disappearances, there are new reports near the ruins. Strange lights over the marsh, the sound of drums from beneath the earth. And one more thing. The gate of Fort Ashbury, long sealed by steel and stone, was found open one morning. No sign of force, just wide open, swinging gently in the wind. Whatever was buried may no longer be buried at all. The erased files when the U.S. Army declassified portions of the Fort Ashbury investigation in 1983. Officials insisted the operation had been purely geological, but tucked among the technical memos and survey maps were fragments that didn't fit weather logs with no dates. Photos of the fort's ruins marked with strange circular burn patterns, and a list of names redacted in thick black ink. The deeper researchers looked, the more they realized something had been carefully and deliberately removed. Dr. Elaine Mercer, a historian from Boston University, was among the first civilians granted access to the archives. She had spent years studying Revolutionary War records, but Fort Ashbury's files struck her as different, more like an autopsy than a report. Every page that mentioned the 1957 excavation bore the same phrase stamped in red: "Non-anomalous event, record expunged." Still, one entry survived. It was a single typed page, dated months before the operation began, referring to a controlled containment of anomalous illumination source recovered from revolutionary structure. In the margin, someone had written in pencil, "Lantern number 13, Elaine was hooked." She spent weeks tracing personnel who had served on the mission. Most were dead. Those who remained refused to speak. One man, an engineer named Davis, finally agreed to meet on the condition that she not record their conversation. They met in a quiet diner off Route 7, the kind of place where no one asks questions. Davis was in his 80s, his hands trembling as he stirred his coffee. "You think you're chasing ghosts," he told her, "but ghosts don't scare the Army, what we found down there. It wasn't human. It wasn't dead either." He leaned closer. "We were told it was an old fort, but the walls below those weren't 18th century. They were older. Much older, and that light, that damned light, it wasn't shining. It was breathing." Elaine pressed for details, but Davis froze. His eyes darted toward the window as if something outside was watching. Then he whispered, "Don't ever go there at night," and walked out. She never saw him again. 2 weeks later, she drove to the ruins herself. The forest had reclaimed nearly everything. The main gate lay half buried in vines, the old courtyard scattered with stones and moss. She found the remnants of the 1957 dig marked by rusted poles and decaying boards. When the wind passed through, it carried a faint metallic hum, low, steady, unnatural. Elaine set up her recorder. Her voice shook slightly as she narrated what she saw. Then she noticed something glinting near the collapsed well. She brushed away the dirt and unearthed a fragment of brass, a corner of a nameplate, worn but legible. The letters read, F. Lang. Colonel Everett Lang, the man who had ordered the lantern buried. She took the artifact back to her car, but as she turned the key in the ignition, the engine refused to start. Static crackled over the radio, though it wasn't on. And then, faintly through the static, came the sound of marching. Slow, rhythmic, echoing like thunder beneath the earth. Elaine fled that night, abandoning her equipment. But when she returned to her apartment in Boston, she found something waiting on her doorstep, a plain envelope. Inside was an undeveloped roll of film and a note written in shaky typewriter font. You forgot this. The photos, once developed, showed the fort's courtyard under floodlights. In one frame, men stood around the excavation pit. In the next, they were gone, but shadows of their bodies still stretched across the ground. She turned the film over to the university archives, but days later the negatives vanished. The only thing left behind was the envelope, and inside it a new note. Stop digging. For a while, Elaine tried to. She taught her classes, avoided interviews. But something had changed in her apartment. Every night, the hallway light flickered at exactly the same hour. And sometimes she swore she heard boots in the stairwell, climbing slowly upward, never reaching her floor. She wrote a letter to a colleague describing everything. The files weren't erased, she concluded. They're being rewritten. The letter was postmarked but never delivered. She disappeared 2 nights later when police entered her apartment. They found her study untouched, her notes stacked neatly on the desk. In the center lay her recorder, still on. The last minute of audio was faint but unmistakable, a man's voice whispering, "Return the light." After that, the government sealed the Ashbury records again, this time indefinitely. Officials claimed the site had been contaminated with unstable gas pockets, but satellite scans show something else, a faint heat signature deep underground that has never cooled. Local hikers say the forest feels wrong now. Birds don't sing near the old fort. Travelers who wander too close sometimes report losing track of time, emerging hours later with no memory of where they've been. A few have claimed to see a glow in the trees, distant but steady, like a lantern swinging in slow motion, but the strangest report came from a retired firefighter who stumbled upon the ruins last winter. He swore he saw a woman's shadow kneeling beside the well, her hand outstretched toward the earth as if listening to something beneath it. When he called out, the light vanished, but her voice drifted back through the dark. They never stopped marching. The firefighter later learned about Dr. Elaine Mercer from an old newspaper. The woman in the article photo was the same one he'd seen. Now, the site is patrolled at night by unmarked vehicles. Locals hear generators running, but no one ever sees the workers. And in recent satellite imagery, a new structure has appeared where the courtyard once was circular, metallic, pulsing faintly in infrared. Whatever Fort Ashbury was, it's no longer buried history. It's breathing again, and somewhere inside that sealed ground, the light that refused to die just flickered back to life. Echoes beneath the earth rain had soaked the forest for 3 days straight, but when the storm passed, the air over Fort Ashbury felt untouched by the downpour. The ground steamed faintly, though the temperature had dropped below freezing. A handful of locals still ventured near the fence to glimpse the restricted site. Drawn by the lights that pulsed faintly through the trees, each night white, then gold, then red, fading like a heartbeat. No one admitted to watching, but everyone did. And everyone heard the same sound just before dawn. The slow rhythm of marching. One man finally broke the silence. His name was Thomas Hale, a journalist, though that wasn't what drew him here. He was the descendant of Private Jonathan Halley, the lone survivor whose confession had once been erased from military records. When the documents reappeared in the public archives decades later, Thomas saw his ancestor's name scrawled beside one phrase, "The fort remembers." He couldn't ignore it. Every generation of his family had spoken of the same curse, men waking at night to the sound of drums, lanterns glowing in empty fields. His grandfather had burned their old letters, believing that destroying the words would end it. It hadn't, and now Thomas wanted answers. He arrived at the perimeter just after midnight, guided by the faint shimmer of floodlights beyond the wire. The old gate was still chained shut, yet the lock hung loose as though someone had cut it recently and closed it again out of habit. He hesitated, then stepped through. Inside. The fort was little more than skeletal walls and sunken stones, half swallowed by moss. The courtyard was a crater of mud, its center sealed beneath a circular metal plate engraved with numbers instead of words. Steam rose around it, thin and white. The air smelled faintly of oil and iron. Thomas turned on his recorder. His voice shook as he whispered into the mic. Fort Ashbury, 2:13 a.m. I'm standing where they found the lantern. The ground is warm. No wind. No sound except he stopped. Something scraped against the metal plate beneath him. A single, drawn-out note, like the edge of a shovel dragged across steel. He dropped to one knee, pressing his ear to the surface. Faint, muffled, almost beneath hearing. Voices. Not words, murmurs, many of them. Then came the first knock. It was soft, deliberate. 1, 2, 3, then silence. His pulse hammered in his throat. He whispered into the recorder again. It's coming from below. He should have left. Every instinct told him to. But curiosity is its own kind of gravity. He brushed away dirt at the edge of the plate until his fingers found a latch one the floodlights didn't reveal. It turned easily. Metal groaned. A breath of cold air spilled out, carrying the smell of smoke and river water. Beneath the plate, a staircase descended into darkness. He stepped down. The tunnel walls were rough, ancient stone. Water dripped from unseen cracks, echoing into the dark. Thomas moved slowly, flashlight trembling in his hand. The stairs ended at a corridor lined with wooden doors, warped and blackened. Every few yards, rusted muskets leaned against the wall as if left in haste. And at the far end, a soft light glowed, the same color as the old lantern described in his ancestor's journal. It hung suspended in midair, unmoving. Its flame was steady, almost tranquil. Yet the shadows it cast writhed across the walls like living things. He raised his recorder. There's a light ahead, looks artificial, but there's no heat. The flame isn't burning anything. The moment he spoke, the light flickered. The shadows froze. A whisper slid through the air, so faint he thought he imagined it. Return. The word chilled him. He remembered the old records, the same word Jonathan Halley had written in his final letter before vanishing. Thomas took a step backward, but the ground gave way beneath his heel. He stumbled, catching himself on the wall, and his flashlight skittered across the floor. For a heartbeat, the beam illuminated something carved into the stone, names, dozens of them. Each etched deeply, each ending with the same date, 1779. At the bottom of the list, a fresh carving. Thomas Halley. He froze. The air thickened, pressing against his chest. The light ahead flared white, flooding the corridor. And for the briefest instant he saw them 12 soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder, faces pale as bone, eyes burning with the same fire as the lantern. Then the flame went out. Darkness swallowed everything. His recorder hit the ground, still running, capturing only the sound of his breath quickening, and the slow march of boots approaching from both ends of the hall. By dawn, the storm had returned. Locals found the gate closed again, the lock replaced. Days later, search teams combed the woods, but there was no sign of Thomas Halley. Only his recorder remained. Recovered near the ruins, the final seconds of audio are faint but distinct, the hiss of wind, the creak of metal, and a voice low, steady, familiar. The records are clean now. Let the fort rest. But the fort does not rest. Travelers still see the glow through the trees, flickering with each heartbeat of the earth. Some swear they hear men chanting beneath the soil. Others say the ground itself hums when touched, like the faint vibration of drums, buried deep below. And so the story circles back to its beginning, the revolutionary troops, who never understood why their haunted reports vanished from the records. Maybe it wasn't erasure. Maybe it was obedience. Maybe the orders came not from generals but from something far older than war. Some secrets aren't buried to be forgotten. They're buried to keep us safe, but every few decades, someone opens the door again, and now, as the night closes over Fort Ashbury once more, the lantern flickers back to life waiting for the next name to be written on the wall.